demand companies. So if you combine them, we find that this curve and this curve intersect. All right, and so in all of economics, we know that the intersection point is where the curves cross. So again, this is like a what-if question. How much would you produce if the price went up? Now, going back to the common sense, I think about how sometimes I go on Amazon and scan a book and see what I could get if I sold it, off my shelf. And if the price is high enough, I could actually decide to put it in the marketplace. If the book doesn't sell, there's a low price, I would just keep it on my shelf. So a lot of times people get called into work and they say, well, we'll pay you time and a half to come in. So would you enter the workforce for more money? Would you sell a book? Would you sell your time? Would you sell anything you have to offer? The answer becomes yes if the price is high enough. Right? So common sense, rising costs, and a ranking can be applied to both supply and demand. So now we have this crossing point. This is the most efficient point for both. This is where QS equals QD, the same quantity for both buyer and seller. It's also the same price. It's the same price for both buyers and sellers. Now, what does that mean? That means that regardless of the actual cost, or regardless of how much you actually want the product, everybody pays the same price. Low-cost companies actually make extra profit. High desiring people, high utility people actually feel like they've gotten a bargain. So this is not a different price for everybody. This is one price determined in the marketplace. And so a lot of times people they can't choose their own price to sell a product at. They actually look at what the market is paying. So this is the equilibrium quantity here. This is the equilibrium price. So equilibrium means balance. This is a balance between buyers and sellers, and a balance between costs and benefits. So it's balanced because each group, both the sellers and the buyers, find that they have the best outcome for both. There's nothing left over. Because it's the same quantity, the quantity sold is the same as the quantity bought. And because there's nothing left over, sometimes people say the market clears. People go home, the market clears out, and it's empty because all the desires of buyers to earn utility and all the desires of sellers to make profit are both satisfied. So what happens if we don't have equilibrium? So one thing that I look at is what happens if you start out with the price too high? Sometimes people talk about what are called market forces. I think that like the force of gravity. If you start out above the earth, gravity pulls you down to where you should naturally be. Market forces are the same idea, and the reason why people like markets a lot is because natural forces pull you into the most efficient situation. You can start out inefficient, but naturally you wind up at the best outcome. So if you can just wind up in the best place without trying, it sometimes seems too good to be true. So sometimes people become purely free market oriented. But it's important to understand why this works. So, first of all, start out at a price that's too high. Here, you have quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. The term for this is a surplus. Now, you might think that businesses would like high prices, but the thing about this is that you can only sell what people buy. At the high price, the law of demand means that fewer people will buy this product. So you can't sell everything you made. Meanwhile, the high price encourages people to produce more. So there's leftover product, the surplus. This is only good for the people who sell the product. All the other people have paid to produce a product that does not sell. You can grow crops, grow apples. You spent labor, land, and capital, paid wages, rents, and interest to grow those apples, and they rot away unsold. So this is not an efficient outcome. So the market is going to wind up closing this gap. I think of it like alligator jaws. It closes from two sides. If I find that my product isn't selling, I cut the price. You can have a clearance sale. You see this at stores. At the same time, people like clearance sales and then they go shopping. So as the price goes down, the other half of the jaws close. And eventually the price falls until it reaches zero surplus, and then it stops closing. What about a price that's below? Now, here you bring on extra customers. But at the same time, the law of supply means that if people can't earn a profit, they actually won't make the product. So according to the law of supply, fewer items get produced, but more people want to buy them. So this is where QD is greater than QS, and this is called a shortage. And again, people like low prices, but not if the shelf is empty. So there's actually nothing or much less produced. At the same time, there's many, many more consumers. Now, the way this is solved is that people who find the shelves empty will find a way to push up the price. If you can think of like a bidding process or an auction, somebody might say, well, I'd rather pay a couple extra dollars than have nothing on the shelf, or to have a long line where there's only a few people going to get a scarce product. So they might actually push the price up through competition. At the same time, the high price is going to be the other part of the jaws. And so as the price goes up, people will be encouraged to produce. Remember, higher prices, according to the law of supply, push quantity up. And so this gap is going to shrink until it reaches the equilibrium point, and then it stops. So it's almost a stable point that happens to be best. Now, like I mentioned, this is bad for all consumers because everybody pays it more, but it's also bad for some producers who can't sell their surplus. So both groups lose. At the same time, this is only good for the few consumers who can get a low price, but all producers lose because they get a lower profit at a lower price. Also, the consumers that can't buy a product because it's not available, they can't get this good either, so they lose utility. So this is bad for some consumers and some producers, or all producers. All right, so finally, you can have something called a price ceiling or a price floor. Now, the way to remember this is I think of, again, like the law of gravity. A floor is something that keeps me from falling down into the center of the earth. So a ceiling is something that keeps me from going up to the sky. So a ceiling can only be something that is below equilibrium. It keeps me from hitting the top. In other words, some force wants me to go up, but something stops me. A floor keeps me from going down. Usually ceilings and floors are government implemented. So a lot of times the minimum wage is a price floor. Wages might want to fall below it, but the law says you can't. Another textbook example is rent controls. Apartment prices and rents want to go up, but the government says that there's a maximum rent that can be charged. So these usually are government-passed laws that benefit a group of people at the expense of another. So this basically short-circuits the market forces and keeps these laws from working. If you have a shortage, this permanently locks in the shortage at a low price. So a rent control, a maximum rent might mean that fewer apartments are built, more people want to live in a city because rent is cheaper. You wind up with fewer units and more people. It's hard to find an apartment. Likewise, a minimum wage might have more people wanting to work at a higher wage or more people able to work at a higher wage. At the same time, businesses might not hire as many people. And so rather than the wage falling, you might have people out of work, surplus workers known as unemployment. Now, rent controls do help some renters. Minimum wage laws do help some workers. But you can say that there are workers unemployed and people who can't find apartments. So again, there's winners and losers in both groups. So the market wants to reach equilibrium because of the laws of supply and demand. If the government doesn't implement some control, then you might have equilibrium.